This week on The Wheelhouse, an assassination attempt and a man under a microscope. It's a presidential election in flux. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is The Wheelhouse. You can see us today. How about that? The show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. Live from Connecticut Public on 1049 Asylum Avenue in Hartford. Well, it has been quite the interesting week, hasn't it? This past Saturday, former President Donald Trump was injured in an assassination attempt at a campaign rally in Pennsylvania. The shooter, identified by the FBI as Thomas Matthew Crooks, is dead. Officials say that 50-year-old Corey Comparatore was killed in the shooting and that two others were injured. President Joe Biden addressed the shooting from the Oval Office hours after it happened. Here's what he said as he was trying to lower the temperature, as he says, on politics in America.
Disagreement is inevitable in American democracy. It's part of human nature. But politics must never be a literal battlefield, and God forbid, a killing field.
Amid an election season like no other, where Biden is dealing with members of his own party questioning his fitness for the job, Saturday's shooting was just the latest twist. At the Republican National Convention this week in Milwaukee, there's a lot of energy around Trump's nomination. We're going to talk more about that in a bit. And we want to give you space to comment on what you saw, on what you've been seeing during this unique presidential election. So we want to know if you have anything to say about the current state of the race for the White House. Join the conversation. Again, we want to give you space today to talk to us. 888-720-9677. 888-720-9677. First, let's start off the show right away, bringing in one of our elected officials who will help us make sense, we hope, of what's happening. So here now on the phone is Democratic Congressman Jim Himes, representative of Connecticut's 4th District. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So important to have you on today. I really appreciate you taking the time for us. I want to ask you first and foremost, Congressman, how did you find out what happened to the former president, and how did you react when you saw it?
Well, yeah, it's one of those moments you won't forget. I was actually out in my front yard mowing the lawn, and my wife stuck her head out of the front door and said the president's been shot, and oh my God, my heart seized up. So yeah, it's one of those moments you're not going to forget. I subsequently learned, thank God, that it was not serious, but, but for the grace of God, we would have had, an epic and horrid event in our history. Bad enough as it is, but, thank God it went down the way it did.
What an incredible situation, though, because we think about personal feelings that politicians, particularly ones that have had to work during the Trump administration, thinking personally about the former president. As someone who did work under him for 4 years, essentially, including on January 6, 2021, and being there in the Capitol. How do you square all of that now with what you've been seeing over the last couple of days?
Well, sadly, and you're hearing this from somebody who was one of the last members of Congress out of the chamber on January 6th. Very sadly, our politics, which have always been rough, people forget we have a long history of rough politics in this country. And, if you're my age, late 50s or so, you sort of remember that era of, Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan. By the way, you remember it with rose-colored glasses. That was pretty rough back then, too. But, if you think back over the generations, to the conflict over Vietnam and the shooting of students at Kent State, the violence associated with the civil rights movement, violence is sadly more of a default setting in American politics than it is the aberration. And the thing is, of course, is that, individual leaders can ramp that up or ramp it down. And, this is a world where individual leaders need to make clear not just that violence is unacceptable, but that we've got to stop using the extreme language that will be misunderstood by a certain percentage of the population. Think that it's simple, and I try this in every town hall meeting, as making it clear that the other side, with whom I may powerfully disagree, is not the enemy. They're not traitors. You know what you do with the enemy and traitors, right? They are the loyal opposition. And the problem is, and this is what happens when you have a politics of demagoguery, extreme language fires people up. And firing people up is an important part of politics. But nonetheless, I really believe the responsibility lives on our shoulders. To do what John McCain did when that woman in the town hall meeting or the debate asked him, is Barack Obama a Muslim? And he said, no, ma'am, he's a very decent guy. That instinct is what is gone in American politics today and absolutely needs to come back.
Ramped up political rhetoric. You talked about people being fired up at this time. Are you worried that this could lead to even more violence?
Of course it could. I mean, I was very gratified to see that Donald Trump, after the attempt on his life, really went out of his way to tamp down the rhetoric, which, let's face it, is a pretty unusual move for him. This is the guy who made light of the near-fatal attack on Paul Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi's husband. So, maybe he's turned over a new leaf. We'll see. But the fact that he did that, the fact that this shooter turns out not to be some, what so many MAGA Republicans were hoping that he would be, some Antifa leftist or whatever, I think has calmed the waters a little bit, but it sure could have gone a different way. If Trump had called for retribution, which is a little bit more in keeping with his history of rhetoric, or if it had turned out that this guy, who did the shooting was some sort of left-wing activist, this could have gone a very different and very darker way.
And then I want to kind of check up on what might be happening in Congress on Capitol Hill right now. Are there any conversations? I know you've been trying to break the stalemate for years, Democrats in the House particularly. Are there any conversations to have any more bipartisan gun legislation now after this event?
We'll see. I mean, I'm an optimist.
So that means none right now?
Well, this is a sore spot for me.
Gotcha.
I'm an optimist and a hopeful guy by nature, but, I'll never forget, as no one will, the murder of children at Sandy Hook. And the next day I said, this is going to do it. This is going to change everything. And of course it didn't. Mm-hmm. So, again, I don't want to say cynical, but I'm a little cautious about saying, oh, well, this will do the trick. Now we'll figure out a way to get assault rifles out of the hands of lunatics,
I only got a couple of minutes left with you, Representative Hyams, and I really want to hone in on something that you said last week. I can't imagine it was easy for you, but you had to come out in public and question whether or not Joe Biden could do the job and essentially say, well, not necessarily question whether or not he could do the job, but I think you were saying that you were hopeful that the president could step aside and not continue to run for re-election. Tell me what that meant to you, and tell me if you still feel that way.
Like so many Democrats, like so many people, I've got a lot of loyalty and a lot of respect for Joe Biden. But we have an election coming up that is going to be enormously consequential for women's rights, for, I would say for democracy in this country. And so we cannot let loyalty or fear or anxiety about the future govern decision making. And, I made my decision for two reasons. Number one, listening to my constituents, many of them who, after that disastrous debate, asked some fundamental questions about whether Joe Biden can prosecute a campaign against Donald Trump. And secondarily, I'm a numbers guy, and I have stared at the polls in the swing districts, not districts, states, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and President Biden is behind in all of them. In some cases, a lot. In some cases, a little. Okay, polls can change. Absolutely. Polls will tell you that. But if you look at Joe Biden, as much as we love him, and you listen to him speak, is this guy all of a sudden going to barnstorm the country and turn that around? In the context, by the way, of Donald Trump, fist-shaking, bloody-faced, I just don't see it. I just don't see it, and the consequences are so high that I had to say what I did. Look, I believe the Democrats have a deep bench and could nominate somebody who would beat Donald Trump.
Congressman Himes, I only got about 10 seconds with you. Are you in the minority here, or do you feel like other Democrats feel the same way? Is it going to change anything?
I'm absolutely not in the minority among my colleagues in the House of Representatives, but I am obviously in a very small minority of those who have chosen to speak out.
Thank you so much, Congressman Himes. We appreciate you joining us, particularly on short notice. You have a nice day, Congressman.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Jim Himes represents Connecticut's 4th District in the United States Congress. We thank Congressman Himes for making the time for us today. More coming up, including a couple local guys in Danny Haar and Jonathan Wharton standing by to analyze those comments, and some more to come from CTGOP Chair Ben Proto, who's going to be joining us live from the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Want to get to your calls on the air today as well, so I'm reminding you to call us and tell us how you're feeling right now about the state of American democracy and the presidential election. 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677.
Support for Connecticut Public Radio comes from Yale New Haven Health, where breakthrough surgical innovations create better outcomes, speed patient recoveries, and improve patients' lives every single day. Learn more at ynhhs.org.
On the Colin McEnroe Show, one of my favorite recent moments was when a guy called up and suggested legalizing mushrooms. Are you personally microdosing at this moment? That's what I want to know.
No. It's Monday, man.
The fact that that's my favorite thing may say more about me.
Listen this afternoon at 1. Support comes from Goodspeed Musicals.
This election cycle, we're hearing a lot about felonies, aging candidates, the Israel-Hamas war. But what aren't we hearing about? Help us cut through the noise and cover the issues you care about. Go to ctpublic.org/election to share your thoughts. Listen to The Wheelhouse Wednesday mornings at 9 on Connecticut Public.
Support comes from the Connecticut Democracy Center, presenting Control Shift Democracy, the impact of technology on society and governance. Thursday evenings this July at Connecticut's Old State House. More info at ctoldstatehouse.com.
This is The Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. We're following the 2024 elections through November and beyond. Stay with us, please. And, hey, you can help shape our coverage, too, by filling out our election survey. Visit ctpublic.org/elections, ctpublic.org/elections. Today on The Wheelhouse, we're covering an election, a consequential one, of course. And we're going to go to some consequential Connecticut residents here to react what we just heard from Congressman Jim Himes. Joining me now via Zoom, Dan Haar, columnist and senior editor with the Hearst Connecticut Media Group. Good morning, Dan.
Good morning. Great to be here.
Great to have you on. Also on Zoom, the preppiest one, Associate Professor of Political Science and Urban Affairs at Southern Connecticut. Oh, there he is. I see you. You're looking glorious over there. Southern Connecticut State University, Jonathan Wharton. Good morning, Jonathan.
Good morning. Thanks for the preppy shout-out.
That's right. Okay, guys. Just want to tell folks they could join the conversation as well, 888-720-9677. You want to unpack what you just heard from the congressman. You want to maybe give us a preview from what you could hear from Ben Proto in a little bit. Give us a call, 888-720-9677. I think what I want you guys to help us with today is why someone like Jim Himes would come out and say what he did about Joe Biden. Jonathan, what do you make of what Jim Himes has said, including today, and also saying, by the way, that he's not in the minority?
Well, Frankie, I've been obsessed about that district because naturally I worked for the former Congressman Christopher Shays, who, by the way, I've been in touch with for the last few months since he's been writing for our beloved Connecticut Hearst, as Dan knows. So I think all three of us have that in common since we do the columns. So for me, I'm intrigued by the 4th District as a former congressional aide, but also we tend to forget that that district has been in play for years for both parties. Now, of course, it's leaning a little bit more Democrat lately, and we have a lot of unaffiliated voters coming from New York as of the pandemic. So I think somebody like Himes is trying as best as possible to navigate a district that has gone in different directions, at least, politically speaking. And let's face it, he's very much a centrist. And as he had said, which he mentioned as well in his, his writings, is that, when you look at the data, Biden is not cutting it in a lot of these swing states, and many of the swing states, the majority of them. And that's what he is overwhelmingly concerned, because he, among others, could have that coattail effect.
Does that mean, though, Jonathan, that the district is essentially up for grabs, or is that way too far to go down at this point?
I think it's too far to go right now.
Okay.
Because, of course, we don't have any polling. It's not been saying, it's not indicating. Of course, Hyams has been incumbent for years. So I would, say that obviously leans Democrat now, and it has been. So I think it's more that he and others are concerned about, the down ballot effect, because a president at the top of the ticket, whomever it is, even an incumbent, is carrying the party. And that's what matters at the end of the day for donors, for support, and for voters.
Dan, you've been following Democrats and whether they're speaking out against Joe Biden. We know that the governor has gone public with his thoughts, essentially agreeing with Jim Hyams. But other members of the delegation haven't necessarily, right?
I would agree with Jonathan, and with the congressman as well, within about 24 hours, really 48 hours, it was at the gala dinner of the Democrats. Enough people told me that everyone thought Biden shouldn't run, in contrast to what they were saying publicly, that it was clear that a vast majority of Democratic top elected people don't want him to run. And I don't know that I agree that the issue is related to their side of the political coin, that is moderate versus liberal. The moderates do tend to be the ones publicly, of the 20 or so that are publicly saying he should go out in Congress, they do tend to be more moderate. But I just see it as a straight front door question. They believe he can't win. I take it on face value, right? That there's the problem with him trailing in the polls, unlike when Obama trailed in the polls, and George and Clinton for a time. First of all, that was now earlier than we are now. Second of all, they were trailing in the polls for political reasons that they were able to reverse. The reason that Biden is now trailing in the polls is not something he can reverse. And in fact, as we've seen with his conversation with Lester Holt on NBC News, every single time he talks, there's going to be at least one thing that his opponents point to and say, aha, see, he can't speak or lead.
Dan, with the people that aren't saying anything yet, is there at least nuance to what they have or are saying behind closed doors? Is there anything that's remarkable to say about those folks that haven't said anything yet?
It ranges from the all-in, rah-rah, Rosa DeLauro wing of this debate to those who are more subtle behind the scenes and who are willing to admit behind the scenes, but that they can't say it publicly, that he's not the right candidate.
Just want to make sure I ask you one more before we go. I'm just distracted by that tremendous jacket. We need a little levity in this tough
you
situation.
said Jonathan.
That tremendous
you
jacket
said Jonathan
and
that.
And you're matching Ollie today with this. You can't see it in the screen frame right now. I'll get it. There's Ollie right there, the octopus. Your shirt matches.
I am wearing peach. I get that Jonathan is the preppy prof, but I'm wearing a peach-colored shirt here, so I'm trying to hold my own.
Just three good-looking men right here on your computer screen. Just really quickly, before we have Ben Proto on in a couple of minutes, I want to tell folks they can call us 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. Anything else you heard in there from the congressman that was remarkable, Jonathan?
I think he's being frank, and I respect him for that, because it takes a lot to do this publicly, and especially after that press conference that took place. So I think what I was more intrigued by was the timing of anything. I'd be curious to find out, Frankie, what led him to do this immediately after that press conference, just as a follow-up question, because I was kind of hoping that he would allude to that. Was there something that really kind of stood out for him after that press conference? Maybe that's what it was, because he only announced it half hour later, and it sounded like he was already prepared to do so in terms of timing factor, if that makes sense.
Oh, that makes a good point. That's what a lot of people were saying after that statement came out. I just want to remind folks, you hear me talking about what people are wearing. That's because I can see them on a stream. And I don't think we've said this on the air yet, but we are streaming. We're providing a video presentation. Right now you're seeing me throw my hands up in the air. If you're on youtube.com/Connecticut Public, if you want to watch a video of us right now, if you're listening on 90.5, say, terrestrially, go to youtube.com/Connecticut Public to catch a video, and you'll see three amazing-looking gentlemen in Jonathan Wharton, the Preppy Prof, myself, Frankie Graziano, and Dan Haar. There they are on your screen. Yes, you did hear that sort of quick reaction from Jim Himes, but it's something that I'm watching the Republican convention from Milwaukee yesterday, and even national television anchors and reporters are having a hard time keeping a straight face as they're telling you that they're hearing from anybody who will talk. Listening to podcasts, even pro-Democrat, pro-Joe Biden podcasts, they're having a hard time right now reconciling with what's happening. So, Dan, well, what's the temperature like nationally on this? When can we see something get done on this, I guess? I don't know. I don't know how to ask this without trying to be as honest as I can.
Obviously, the more time that passes, the more likely it is that President Biden is going to be the nominee on the ballot. And to some Democrats, that's just fine. He remains. There is no other obvious choice. We can talk about that at great length or not. Vice President Harris is not an obvious choice, and any other option brings problems both procedurally and racially. And so,
but I think for many Americans, I know you're right in this regard, but I would say that for many Americans, they think that there's an obvious choice because Kamala Harris is vice president. But to also back up what you're saying, I think it was John King, and John King on CNN, he likes to talk about polls, right? He had a poll that he brought out that had 4 other people. Let me see if you think any of these people are remarkable, Dan. We had Mark Kelly, who is in Arizona. He's a lawmaker out of Arizona. Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan. Josh Shapiro, who's out there in Pennsylvania. And I'm having trouble remembering who the 4th is right now. But you get the
Illinois
idea.
governor. Illinois governor.
There you go. So that's in addition.
Or it could be the Maryland. It could be the Maryland governor.
That was actually Maryland Governor Wes Moore. Thank you so much for that. Yes. But go ahead. Yeah.
But in any case, the point I want to make is, yes, the Democrats are worried, but the whole point, and this comes into focus as we watch the Republican convention, the whole point is that whoever is the nominee, the Democrats need to and are attempting to keep a focus on who is Donald Trump and now who is J.D. Vance on this other ticket. And there still is a debate to be had and a battle to be had, and it is still 2 administrations fighting against each other.
We appreciate, guys, the analysis. We're going to break away from you guys just for a second and keep you on. Don't go anywhere, because live from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, we're joined right now by the CTGOP chair, Ben Proto. Chairman Proto, thank you so much for joining us on the Wheelhouse this morning.
Hey, Frankie, how you doing?
There you are. It's good to see you from Milwaukee.
Sorry for the hotel lighting. This is about the best we can do. I should have brought my ring light with me, I guess. Who knew I was going to need it this much this week?
That's right. I called you while you were already in Milwaukee, so you didn't know. But thank you so much for doing this. We appreciate it.
No problem. Happy to do it.
We've already had a couple of nights, but Monday, I guess we could say, was a big news day for Republicans nationally. We had J.D. Vance, formally nominated as Donald Trump's vice presidential pick. And then there was, of course, Trump's first appearance in public, really, with people around him. After Saturday's events, an emotional visit. Did you catch any of that in person? What was the reaction that you saw?
Yeah, I was in the room. I was on the convention floor when President Trump came out. Frankie, I don't know if you've ever been to a national convention.
I have not.
They're always very exciting, and I'm sure Jonathan and Dan can probably tell you about them. But they're very exciting. There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of electricity. I said this morning on another show, I said when Donald Trump came out onto the convention floor, every power plant in probably the city of Milwaukee, if not the state of Wisconsin, could have been turned off, and there would have been enough energy to light up the entire state.
Wow. On the shooting, I want to have you remark on that, because this is such a big moment in American history, and Trump did survive this shooting. How was that? We're talking about political rhetoric and violence and things like that today. So is that changing in any way the messaging that the party might have in Connecticut, maybe nationally? Is there maybe a change in strategy or words used in any correspondences with the public?
Yeah, look, I think you're hearing a lot more of, at least on our side, the rhetoric trying to be turned down some. We're trying to do that here at the convention on the floor. We're trying to keep chants very positive, very upbeat about Trump, about USA, about what we're doing. I think, as we've heard speakers throughout the last 2 days have been more less rhetoric, let's put it that way, and more substance. And yes, attacking the Biden-Harris agenda and their record and, what the Democrats have done over the last number of years. But I think we've tried to hear a lot more positivity about our agenda, our platform. We got a great platform that we put out. I had the honor of serving on that committee and working closely with the Trump campaign on getting that platform passed last week through our committee. So you're hearing more of what I call positivity and positive messaging.
I want to ask you about the platform in a little bit. I just want to follow up on kind of what's happening out there in Milwaukee and what's happening with the party. Are you kind of anecdotally noticing a shift, maybe not just in the last couple of days, but even in the last couple of weeks since we saw that debate? Are you noticing a shift within how Republicans are viewing and talking about this election?
Yeah, look, as the polling data that we see in Connecticut, if we want to be Connecticut specific, Joe Biden is upside down, even among Democrats across the state in a lot of ways, not as much as obviously with Republicans and even on affiliates. And I think you're hearing, more people becoming concerned about, Joe Biden's ability to continue to be president, and even more concerned that Kamala Harris, may end up becoming president should they get reelected. Which I think scares people even more than Joe Biden being president. So there's I think a huge swing in the conversations that are being had among voters and about what that means going forward.
Why would there be such a concern if Kamala Harris was president? What are you hearing from your constituents there?
Well. No one really thinks that having a president who giggles when asked a question because she doesn't have an answer to it is really the kind of person we need leading the country or the world. Look, Kamala Harris was chosen for a reason, and it had absolutely nothing to do with her ability to be the next president of the United States, to be the vice president of the United States. It was clearly gender and racial politics that were put in play by the Democrats. And as a result, they have a person sitting a heartbeat away from the presidency who really is not capable of serving in that role.
Just looking at candidates for federal office and happening out of Connecticut and people that you're talking to, are you advising them on how to talk about this race? Are you advising them on how to talk about Kamala Harris and how to talk about Joe Biden and what's happening with Democrats?
Look, what I suggest to candidates is you're running in your own election. You need to get yourself elected, and you need to be talking about your agenda, your vision, where you see the future of America and Connecticut being, and how you being elected can help create a better Connecticut and a better America. And so I think when they talk about those things and they push those agendas, it not only helps them, but it helps the entire ticket. So candidates are very candidate specific and candidate driven. And as a result, I think having those conversations about themselves, their agenda, their vision, their proposals, why they're the better choice helps everybody up and down the ballot.
Ben, we've talked on the show about MAGA-style politics and whether it could impact people running in Connecticut. I never thought I'd ask our colleagues, as I had today, whether or not the 4th District was up for grabs. I don't think it is necessarily, but nonetheless, things are, as you said earlier, upside down, even in Connecticut. So, what do you do with MAGA-style politics and whether or not this could pop up in the race with somebody like a Ryan Fazio who's running in Greenwich? We've heard in recent years, and I don't know if you necessarily agree with this, that this could impact Trump just being on the ballot could impact somebody like a Ryan Fazio in a place like Greenwich in the 36th.
Look, I think at the end of the day, if people are voting for a state senator because of who the presidential candidates are, then I think they're missing the point of the election. The other side of it is, I think, you talk to somebody like Ryan Fazio. This is a state senator who, in a very short period of time has tremendously distinguished himself in Hartford. I think, even Dan Haar would agree with that. My far left liberal Republican friend. But yeah, I think,
Can't wait to ask Dan what he thinks about that.
Remember, Dan's a registered Republican.
Oh,
a proud registered Republican, as he reminds us all the time.
Let's stay with though the go ahead.
So, but I think, look, Ryan has, I think, distinguished himself. He's done a tremendous, he's represented, Greenwich and Stanford and New Canaan very well. I think, you've got a strong base down there for him. He's well known, well liked. And I think Ryan's going to be fine on his own. And also, I think, you're seeing a shift back in Greenwich. I talk to folks down there a lot. They're very concerned about the Biden-Harris ticket as well. And look, here's the thing, rightly or wrongly, the shooting did a couple of things politically. And it's unfortunate that, we have to talk about politics while at the same time talking about people who were killed as a result of that. I think everybody that you talk to will agree that the shooting absolutely solidified the Republican base for Donald Trump and Republican candidates.
I just want to ask you one more question before we get out. I want to talk to you about Project 25 because it's been something that a lot of people are asking us about.
Has nothing to do with the Republican agenda, has nothing to do with the Republican platform, is not involved. It's, everyone
Would
makes
you support it if it were enacted or anything like that?
I don't even know what it is.
So it's the Heritage Foundation. I understand they had a role even going back to Ronald Reagan, but they're talking about a potential Trump transition. I guess Trump has tried to distance himself, as you're trying to mention here. But
I'm just out of curiosity, Frankie. Is there any reason why there's no conversation about the liberal think tanks and their proposals and what they do to help Democratic presidents?
It's a fair question, but I'm talking to the CTGOP chair. And the only reason why I'm asking is because we're getting a lot of comments on this on the survey we did. Folks can fill it out if they'd like to, ctpublic.org/election. But that's what a lot of people are. We have Susan from Guilford. She's concerned about Project 2025. And
I'm sure she is because, quite frankly, and I say this with all due respect to you sitting there, you've all pushed it because you've all made it an issue. The Republicans haven't made it an issue. Donald Trump hasn't made it an issue. The RNC hasn't made it an issue. It's not mentioned in our platform at all.
Yeah, help me with your platform. Does it have anything on we talk about Project 25 here. It's talking about maybe getting the abortion pill mifepristone off the market. Is that in the platform here in Connecticut?
Well, the platform is very specific in regards to the issue. It says that we believe that the issue belongs properly with the states, which is what the Dobbs decision says, and that the state legislatures are in a better position to make those decisions. The platform supports access to prenatal care. It supports access to birth control, and it supports access to IVF. So, I think it's a pretty standard position that the Republicans have held for many, many years. And so this is a media created firestorm that has nothing to do with the Republican Party, and it's just not part of the platform. It's not even mentioned. There's nothing that I'm aware of that is even taken from any other think tank. These are all Donald Trump's proposals and visions and agenda. Like Frankie, this is my 7th convention, my 5th as a delegate. I've been involved in various committees and conventions, and I can tell you this, having been on the platform committee this year, Donald Trump was the first presidential candidate that I'm aware of that I've attended who actually put pen to paper on the platform, made edits to it, added to it. This is Donald Trump's vision. It's not the Heritage Foundation or anybody else's vision for America. This is Donald Trump and the Republican Party's vision. And so I think the whole the Heritage or Project 2025 or whatever it's called has nothing to do with this. It's not involved in it, and it's a media created falsity that really is just not taking the country or the conversation in any positive direction.
Thank you so much for coming on the show here from Milwaukee. We got to talk to Ben Proto, one of the delegates from Milwaukee here live. Thank you for coming on this morning, Ben. We appreciate it.
Happy to do it, Frank. You have a good one.
You have a good one as well. Let's bring back in Dan Haar and Jonathan Wharton. Dan Haar, a registered Republican, I understand it, as we just heard there. How'd you take that one?
Well, I am a registered Republican. I registered on January 2nd, exactly the last day possible for me to vote in the primary against Donald Trump and for a more reformed Republican Party. I'm
just messing with you here. Let's go forward here because I don't got a lot of time after we went with Project 2025. There's a lot to unpack, but more than anything, guys, I'm tight on time. I don't want to ask too much about these views on Kamala Harris, but what's up with this obsession that we have nationally that we can't have somebody be picked that's a woman or a person of color to run? It's got to be a diversity thing. How do you address that? What do we think?
I don't think there is such a need, or that's the issue. Isn't diversity or not diversity. The issue is who are the candidates.
And that's what we're trying to talk about there. We're talking about whether or not Joe Biden is going to be president and continue. Kamala Harris is one of the people that could replace him. And we have Connecticut GOP chairman saying right there that the only reason why the Kamala Harris is in the discussion is because of the color of her skin and the fact that she is a woman. So I don't know where to go after that other than to say Project 2025 seems to be something that people are talking about, but that Republicans, at least in power, are trying to distance themselves from. What do you think, Jonathan?
Well, I mean, you heard the chairman say that, it is a platform from a think tank. And so, it's not unusual that think tanks offer their own platforms. And, this happens regularly and ideologically, there are a variety of think tanks that exist out there, whether they're liberal or conservative. So there's going to be elements of it that'll be kind of baked into a party platform. That's not that unusual. It does take place. I think you've just seen more attention on this one than other platforms coming from think tanks. It's gotten a lot of attention.
What about your thoughts on this, Dan? Do you think that the platform in Connecticut is that different from Project 2025?
The answer is that, yes, the Republican official platform is more moderate. Let's not be naive here. And I'm not accusing Jonathan of being naive, but let's not, as the polity, be naive here. This is more than just an outside, unconnected. This is a joke, right? These are the people that were in the administration, and let's not get caught up on individual details like mifepristone or this or that very specific detail. The overall tone of that Project 25, 900 and something page manifesto is that we will return America to the white Christian nation that it was formed as, with the family unit being the father, the non-working mother, and their children living at home. It's also talking importantly, as we saw with the recent Supreme Court case, about removing the power of the agencies, the bureaucracy, the experts who do things like set what water quality standards are and FDA standards and that all the millions of decisions that are made in government, removing that from experts and putting it in the hands of Congress. Theoretically, that may be a good idea, but what it ends up doing is politicizing everything and leaving things in a sort of a lockdown that we have now.
Jonathan, you saw pretty much a minimization of whether or not Donald Trump has an impact on people down ballot, particularly in Connecticut. Do you still see that? Is there a Trump effect here for somebody like a Ryan Fozzie, who's somebody I keep bringing up because we've heard his name mentioned in past shows as somebody who could be impacted just by Trump and MAGA politics being on the ballot? What are your thoughts?
No, anytime you have anybody at the top of the ticket, whether it's a presidential candidate, gubernatorial candidate for that matter, you're going to have that effect. The question, or bigger question concern can be, are we going to see more of a turnout among people who are, let's say, against what's going on nationally with the Republican Party, or even what's going on with Biden? So one way or the other, that turnout effect is going to matter for all races, really. Great example of this is what took place back in 2008, obviously. Chris Shays got voted out and Jim Himes got elected, partly on the Obama wave. I don't want to ignore that. When it comes down to it, you get one side of the fence showing up, and more importantly, you steer those people who lean ideologically and partisan-wise towards one party or the other. Because remember, the majority of voters in Connecticut, and even in the 4th District and 5th District for that matter, are unaffiliated voters. So if you can speak beyond the base, and gain interests or have people against you on one side or the other, then that's what matters at the end of the day. I also want to emphasize, to Dan's point, that when it comes to think tanks, organizations, it's not unusual that prior administrations are part of them. We saw the same thing with Obama's administration being part of Americans for Progress, for example, part of that think tank. So oftentimes administrators, regulators, those people do go into it. And in light of what Dan's bringing up with the Chevron case, certainly the big concern still stands, should it be with the agency or Congress in making these decisions with regulations, for example.
Jonathan, where can people find you on Twitter and get those thoughts of yours and on social media?
Well, I miss you, Frankie, on Twitter. I'm sure Dan will say the same thing. I'm at Preppy Prof.
The Preppy Prof, the preppiest one. And Dan, people got to read your column because we don't have time to go through it right now. But I'm going to understand that after all that Donald Trump has been accused of doing, after a judge found that he raped a woman, after a jury unanimously agreed that Trump falsified business records to hide a hush money payment to Stormy Daniels in order to influence an election, by the way, after January 6th, you're going to tell me that this guy doesn't get to talk about unifying the country, right?
That's exactly right.
And where can they find the column?
That column is in print today in all of our papers in Connecticut, New Haven, Connecticut Post, Stamford Advocate, Denver News Times. It's also online at CT Insider under my name.
Thank you so much, Dan. I appreciate it. I can't believe we have to say goodbye to you guys, but thank you so much for coming on the show. And thank you for helping us unpack those interviews with Congressman Jim Himes and CTGOP Chairman Ben Proto.
Thank you, Frankie.
Have a good day, guys. Up next, we dive into the topic of political violence and how rhetoric and federal gun policy could be contributing to the weakening of our democracy. You can join the conversation, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677.
Marine biologist Jasmine Graham grew up in a fishing family speaking Creole dialect in South Carolina's Low Country. Then she fell in love with sharks.
I was particularly interested in just like those wild and wacky adaptations that sharks have, hammerheads, sawfish, anything that you look at it and you go, why do you look like that?
That's on the next On Point.
Listen this morning at 10.
Connecticut Public's new documentary, Fighting for Home, How Housing Policy Keeps Connecticut Segregated, uncovers how exclusionary zoning and redlining have left a legacy of oppression. Through powerful stories and expert insights, we reveal the systemic barriers that have kept Black and Brown communities segregated for decades. Witness the struggle and determination of those fighting for change. Stream now at ctpublic.org/housing.
Support provided by Connecticut Humanities and the Connecticut Fair Housing Center.
The spotlight is on foreign policy tonight at the Republican National Convention. I'm Susan Davis. Join me for live special coverage from NPR News.
Hope you can join us tonight at 9.
Support comes from Live Well. Redefine life with dementia, your way, with access to prevention and wellness programs, assisted living and skilled health care, all co-designed by people living with dementia. Why accept memory care when you deserve more at livewell.org.
This is The Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. You are seeing us this morning live from Hartford. If you are watching on youtube.com/Connecticut Public, you're also hearing us on terrestrial radio and ctpublic.org/The Wheelhouse. And we're inviting your phone calls today, 888-720-9677. We want to talk about the state of our democracy, continuing our discussion about the tumultuous week in U.S. politics. Biggest news over the weekend, of course, the assassination attempt of former president and current candidate Donald Trump. I want to talk about what this might mean in an election cycle that's already been pretty heated. We have a couple of guests here now to talk about the state of rhetoric and violence in America today. We got Jason Stanley, a returning participant on the Wheelhouse here today. He researches political rhetoric at Yale University, and he's the author of the forthcoming book, Erasing History, How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. Good morning, Jason.
Morning, Frank.
Good to see you and actually see you here on Zoom if you're following us on youtube.com/Connecticut Public. And we've got David A. Graham. He covers politics and national affairs for The Atlantic. Thanks for being on, David, and good to see you as well.
Good to be here.
Good to have you on. Folks, you could join the conversation, 888-720-9677. First things first, David, you get this question. Are we actually seeing an increase in political violence in this country, would you say?
It's hard to quantify that. It depends on how we count it. But I think it's definitely fair to say we've had a surge in notable incidents. We've had attempts on high-profile people, obviously President Trump. But there was an assassination attempt against Brett Kavanaugh. There was the shooting at a congressional baseball game. There was January 6th most prominently. So I think we've seen a lot of these high-profile incidents that are, it's notable that we're seeing these big ones.
Hard to track because there's no centralized database, and the definition of political violence is different depending on who you ask. So it's good to say that it is hard to quantify. Jason, the negative political rhetoric that we're hearing in this country, how negative is it really?
Well, I'm really happy that you identified the racism and sexism in the Republican in the comments previously made.
Oh, you heard that.
Yes. I mean, so let's break down that rhetoric. The Republicans are running this campaign against DEI. And what that means is that any black person, especially any black woman, but they accused the mayor of Baltimore, the black mayor of Baltimore, who's black male, of being a DEI hire. This is a code for saying that black people and women are not competent. What he said, let's break down the rhetoric here. What he said is that Kamala Harris giggles when she's asked a question. This is the former Attorney General of the state of California, the former senator of the state of California, and he's saying she's a child. Now, that's a common rhetorical tactic of infantilizing people. It's usually directed against women and black people. So we're seeing this as a central tactic of the Republican Party. When someone treats the the Vice President of the United States, former senator, former Attorney General, says she's a child, that's concerning rhetoric. It's racist.
J.D. Vance is 39 years old, and he's the vice presidential candidate for Republicans. So if Donald Trump were to be elected, you'd have potentially J.D. Vance being very close to the presidency. And I would imagine that his experience isn't as vast as somebody like a Kamala Harris, as you're saying, Attorney General, former senator. Jason.
That's right. I mean, I'm not going to deny, I would never infantilize J.D. Vance. I mean, he's very, very smart, very ideological, very far right. I think he's very threatening to Democratic goals, I mean, threatening to the war against Vladimir Putin, the struggle against Vladimir Putin. So, but, and also it wouldn't really work, right? It doesn't really work against white men to infantilize them that way, to talk about them as children giggling and such like.
David covers politics and national affairs for The Atlantic. So help me now zoom out here and look at this rhetoric that we've seen since the shooting. Obviously, President Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, a bit muted for once. I would imagine that could happen during an assassination attempt, but we're not necessarily seeing that from other Republicans, right?
Right. Well, first I'd say to Jason's point, we've seen in the aftermath of this assassination attempt, conservative media is talking about this being a result of DEI. They're claiming that because they're female Secret Service agents, they're responsible for this. So, this sort of rhetoric has continued even in the aftermath of the shooting. And, you've seen Republicans talk about how they're going to turn to sort of unity rhetoric and they're going to tone things down. And I think at some of these early speeches in the RNC, you've seen a little bit of that. And I'll be curious to see, what exactly Trump does in his speech on Thursday, his nomination acceptance speech. But among the people you see on stage at the RNC is somebody like Mark Robinson, who's the Republican nominee for governor in North Carolina, who said just very recently that some folks need killing. So, I mean, this is really deeply embedded in the Republican Party, and I think it's hard to disengage it from the sort of MAGA approach and say that we're going to have a soft, fuzzy kind of MAGA.
Jason, can you help us connect in some way rhetoric to political violence? In one survey conducted last month by the University of Chicago, 17% of respondents said they support the use of force to either restore Trump to the presidency or prevent him from becoming president. 10% said they supported using force to prevent him. 7% said that they supported using force to reinstate him. It's not small. It's small, but it's not insignificant, right? That's just with Trump. We know necessarily that, as we're hearing a lot from Republicans saying that the rhetoric comes a lot from the left, It's not always the left that has this rhetoric. How close are we to political violence because of what people say?
Well, I mean, it's not just the left that has this rhetoric. I mean, yes, it's a lot there's a lot of projection happening from the Republican Party. Donald Trump broke longstanding norms in this country, describing when in his discussions of Mexican immigrants, in his discussion of political opponents. It's not just we're past the point of violent rhetoric, which really Trump he introduced explicit slurs, the way he talks about immigrants as terrorists and criminals. So this, of course, justifies, if people are terrorists and criminals, you can put them in large detention camps or concentration camps, as it seems we've been promised to do. At this point, we are getting explicit declarations of state violence when if Trump comes to power again. State violence, he says he's going to use the state against his political opponents. And it's a tricky situation about what to do, because for people like me who do see democracy on the line here, it is an existential moment. But political violence is not only immoral, but benefits the side, essentially a side that views this as a power struggle for a king. The Republican chairman said, "Oh, Donald Trump himself is all over the Republican program." Of course he is, because fealty to Trump is the principal aspect of that program.
Dan Haar, who was just on, said in the last segment that Project 2025, don't even look at that document. You just have to understand that whatever the administration might look like if Donald Trump is elected, there is going to be some kind of return to this ideal where it's all about the white Christian national. At least that's the thought that a lot of people are having, or at least the fear maybe that people are having. So we have that. We also have January 6th, and that seemingly being okay, and perhaps people being, I don't know, exonerated, or maybe their criminal records expunged. So how do we square that with the violence of the other day, and a lot of people taking issue with that, with people not necessarily having an issue, I guess, with January 6th?
Yeah, well, this is a completely unprecedented situation in a democracy. I mean, I suppose it's precedented because we had, Hitler did a coup, and then years later tried a coup, and then years later ran as a Democratic candidate leading a party in a Democratic election. But in the United States, at least, this has never happened. A president who tried to remain in power by overthrowing after he lost an election. So we're in completely uncharted territory here. And it's not clear really how to talk about it, right? If you say, wait, Donald Trump tried to remain in power, and it looks like, if you look at the past, that he will just remain in power come what may, if he is elected again. If you say that, now the Republicans have this talking point that now you're saying it's an existential matter. So they're trying to say describing the actual political facts is off the table now. And I don't know how to proceed politically if we can't say this president ginned up a violent insurrection and tried by multiple means to remain in power after he lost an election. Apparently, we're not allowed to say that because, even though it's true, because it's dangerous rhetoric. And finally, we should just note, as you did previously in this program, that the more we learn about the shooter, the more it seems to be an issue about gun control than politics.
And that's where we're going to go with David right now, but I'm going to play a clip first. Earlier this week on a powerful episode of Where We Live, which airs in this time slot other days on the week on Connecticut Public, my colleagues played a clip of Vivek Murthy, the U.S. Surgeon General, talking about the first of its kind advisory on firearm violence distributed by the office. 54% of adult Americans saying they or somebody that they're intimately familiar with has experienced gun violence.
It outlines the urgent threat firearm violence poses to the health and well-being of our country. As a doctor, I've seen the consequences of firearm violence up close. in the lives of the patients I've cared for over the years. These are moms and dads, sons and daughters, all of whom were robbed of their physical and mental health by senseless acts of violence.
David, another shooting involving a youngster with access to an AR-style rifle. This time, it's 20-year-old Thomas Crooks, a registered Republican. I gave you maybe a quote for your next article earlier. I didn't, but Jim Himes may have, when he said, essentially, there are no bipartisan talks right now to have some gun control after a shooting last week. Is that what you're seeing, and what the heck do we do with all that?
Yeah, I think it's striking how little conversation we've seen about that. So, President Biden yesterday suggested that we should have an assault weapons ban. The sort of rhetoric you might expect, but I don't think anybody thinks that will go anywhere. We saw some movement on gun control legislation early in the Biden administration. I think that went as far as this Congress is willing to bear. We know that the general population would support some measures. I think there's the real division, obviously, and maybe the most effective gun control would be too far for the courts and too far for many Americans. But it's clear that Congress doesn't have the will to do things. So even in a situation where someone has shot at and struck a former president in an assassination attempt, and we're being told we can't, as Professor Stanley says, we can't talk about certain things. One of the things we seem not to be able to talk about is the prevalence of guns and how that increases the risk of violence.
We got about a minute left, so I'm going to give each of you 30 seconds to answer the following question. Where the heck do we go next on this? And what is the road to November here in terms of electoral violence, the threat of electoral violence or political violence? What should we be looking out for, David A. Graham?
Well, I think one thing that's amazing is we're having this conversation, obviously, that it feels like in many ways already the news cycle is moving on from something as serious as this assassination attempt. So I'm not sure what effect it will have. And I think the talk about coming together in unity and turning down the rhetoric is likely to be fairly short-lived. I think we'll be back to the same kind of heated discussion, by the end of the month, as though nothing happened.
You feel the same way, Jason? You got 30 seconds here. Go ahead.
I absolutely feel the same way.
Wow.
And we have to see rhetorical moves right now, like what we're seeing from the Republicans, that they're fomenting political violence as an attempt to silence and shut down legitimate political speech. It's one thing saying that immigrants are poisoning the blood of our nation. That's illegitimate political speech. But to point out that Trump, Project 2025, are threats to democracy, that's not just legitimate political speech. That's vital to keep in mind as we go forward.
Jason Stanley at Yale, thank you so much for joining us. Good luck on your upcoming book. And, of course, David A. Graham from The Atlantic. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A lot of people to thank today because we had this live stream, so thank you so much. On today's Wheelhouse, produced by Kay Perkins, edited by Wheelhouse executive producer Katie Tolarski, technical producer, the omniscient Gene Amatruda, Dylan Reyes edited promotional material for the show, Bradley O'Connor, Joe Koss, Julianne Veracci, they made this stream possible. Thank you to Sam Hockaday for the graphics, of course, Tess Terrible for helping us in studio, and to Robin Doyon-Aiken and Meg Dalton for their support of the show. Download the Wheelhouse anytime on your favorite podcast app. Thank you so much to our social and visual team as well. I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse. Thanks for listening.